On September 2nd, 2022, something happened on the Dutch high-voltage grid that, well, just shouldn't have been possible. A standard short circuit, an event that safety systems are built to shut down in less than a second, was somehow allowed to continue for 4.5 minutes. This caused a massive cascade of failures with some pretty serious consequences. Today, we're going to break down the official DNV report to figure out exactly how this happened. So this is the scene. This is the Dronten Ulsterpath substation. What you're looking at here isn't a fire in the usual sense. It's an arc flash. That's raw electricity literally tearing through the air, generating this incredible light and intense heat. This is the raw, destructive power of a short circuit that all of the safety systems fail to stop. For 4.5 minutes. And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? High-voltage grids are some of the most protected systems on the planet. Any fault is supposed to be isolated in, like, the blink of an eye. So the absolute key question here is, why did this one last for 270 seconds? To get that answer, we've got to unravel a whole chain of human errors, hidden defects, and some truly incredible bad timing. All right, to really get a grip on this, let's start by setting the scene on the day of the incident. Okay, so take a look at this map. This is the area in Flevoland. The whole thing kicked off at the brand new Dronten Ulsterpath substation. You can see it marked there with a number 2. It was getting its power from a single 150 kilovolt circuit from the main station in Lelystad. Now you're going to want to pay close attention to location number 1. That's where the high voltage line crosses a major railway line, the Hansa line. This spot is going to become critically important a little later on. Let's just stop and put this into perspective for a second. The normal, expected response time for a fault like this is about 1/10 of a second. This event, it lasted 2,700 times longer than that. I mean, it's an almost unimaginable failure of multiple safety systems, all at once. So how did this all kick off? Well, like a lot of disasters, it started with a single, seemingly small action. At 3:05 in the afternoon, a technician at that new Dronten station closes an earthing switch. Now, these switches are a super important safety feature. They're designed to connect a power line to the ground, making sure it's de-energized and safe to work on. The problem was, in this case, the circuit was very much alive. Closing that switch created a direct path for 150,000 volts straight to the ground, and boom, you've got a massive short circuit. Now, what's really fascinating here is the human element. This wasn't some reckless act. It was a routine, a habit that had been built up during the station's construction. See, back then, when the station was disconnected from the grid, doing this was a totally standard, safe procedure. But the routine never got updated after the station went live. It was a habit that had suddenly become incredibly dangerous. And this leads us to another critical question. Okay, the technician made a mistake. But why was the opportunity for that mistake even there? According to all the procedures, that line should have been dead. Well, the investigation found something crucial. The night before the incident, the main circuit breaker back in Lelystad, the one that controlled this line, it failed to respond to a remote off command. And the report is crystal clear on this. The established procedures say that in a situation like that, the circuit should have been manually de-energized and taken out of service. But it wasn't. This was the pre-existing condition that set the whole stage for disaster. So a short circuit happens. This is actually a pretty common event, and there are multiple layers of automated protection designed to stop it instantly. But here, every single one of them failed. To really get our heads around how that's possible, we can use the famous Swiss cheese model of accident causation. The idea is pretty simple, really. Each layer of safety is like a slice of cheese with some holes in it. Normally, if one layer fails, if a risk gets through one of those holes, the next slice of cheese will stop it. A catastrophe only happens on that super rare occasion that all the holes in all the slices just happen to line up perfectly. On September 2nd, they did. We had 3 automated safety systems, 3 slices of cheese, and they all failed, one right after the other. First, the primary protection, which is your immediate local defense. Then, the dedicated backup, which is designed to kick in if that primary one fails. And finally, the network protection, which is the wider safety net from the feeding stations. Well, let's look at each one. Barrier 1, the main protection. And the timing here is just unbelievable. Technicians back in Lelystad were trying to figure out what was wrong with that faulty breaker. To do that, they switched a button to local control. This action, taken just 40 seconds before the short circuit, is designed to block all remote signals, and that included the automatic trip signal from the protection relay. So when the fault happened, the system correctly sent the command to open the breaker, but the signal was blocked at the very last step. Okay, so primary protection fails. That's what the backup is for, right? There's a system called breaker failure protection that's supposed to see that the breaker didn't open and then trip all the other breakers to isolate the problem. But it never activated. The DNV report found a latent wiring error in the system. It had probably been sitting there for who knows how long, completely unnoticed, because the quality control tests hadn't been fully completed. The backup system was, for all intents and purposes, dead. This is the final automated defense. The protection systems way back at the power plants feeding the grid are supposed to act as a wider net. They should see a huge fault like this and cut the power. But they didn't, at least not right away. Turns out their settings were misconfigured and weren't in line with policy. This meant they saw the fault as being outside their immediate responsibility zone. The crucial result was that for almost 4 minutes, the grid just kept feeding thousands of amps into a dead short. And this is where the laws of physics just take over. When you pump thousands and thousands of amps into a system with no way of shutting it off, the consequences become very dramatic and very destructive. This chart really gives you a sense of the raw power involved. The first short circuit, fault I, was already pulling about 8,500 amps. But as things escalated, the current jumped to a staggering 15,000 amps. All of that current generates an incredible amount of heat. These high voltage lines, which are designed to operate at a maximum of 80 degrees Celsius, heated up to over 300 degrees. They were literally glowing and smoking as the grease inside them started to burn off. This timeline shows how it all played out. The first short circuit happens at time 0. For almost 4 minutes, the lines are getting hotter and hotter, stretching and sagging lower and lower to the ground. Then, at 3 minutes and 50 seconds, they sag so much that they actually touch the overhead power line of the Hansa Line railway. This creates a second, even more severe short circuit. This new, larger current of 15,000 amps was finally big enough to get the attention of that misconfigured feeder protection, which automatically cleared the fault after a total of 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Meanwhile, operators in the control center had figured out what was going on and were manually trying to isolate it, completing their actions just 5 seconds after the system finally tripped itself. So wow, this incident was a true perfect storm, a combination of events that exposed hidden weaknesses in processes, in testing, and in technology. So what are the big takeaways? The DNV report lays out several crucial recommendations. First, procedures for new equipment have to be tightened up to stop those construction phase habits from carrying over. Quality assurance and testing have to be way more rigorous to find hidden errors, like that bad wiring. Protection settings need to be audited to make sure they're compliant. And finally, employee training has to be improved. Really, it calls for a systemic focus on all those points where human processes and automated technology meet. In the end, the report's own words probably sum it up best. It was a confluence of circumstances. Not one single failure, but a whole series of small, disconnected problems and mistakes that all aligned perfectly to create a major disaster. And this leaves us with a final and, honestly, a pretty unsettling thought. This incident exposed multiple hidden flaws, a wiring error, a gap in procedure, a misconfiguration that went completely unnoticed for who knows how long. It just makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many similar hidden failures are lurking silently in the complex infrastructure that powers our world, just waiting for their own perfect storm?